Oh gosh, it is fantastic to see you two. I've been thinking about this introduction for days, if not longer. And I'll just say this. I've spent the last, I don't know how many hours it's been, staring at friends and colleagues and, really rock stars of this people analytics community. It's like the Academy Awards of people analytics to me. And then I'm thinking, well, Rashanda and Isaiah, they're new to me and they're likely new to the community, but they are rock stars themselves. They come out with a best hit thriller worthy of an Academy Award. And so my job is just to sit back and watch you two be awesome, because I really celebrate both of you individually and certainly what you two are doing. So thank you for being here. Isaiah, Rashanda, if you would, welcome and introduce yourselves, and look forward to what you got.
Thank you so much. We really just want to say not only thank you, but thank you even last week for being a part of data and diversity. But we just want to start out by just welcoming everybody who's here. Welcome to Ripple for Good, our Equity Matters Ripple for Good event. We're super excited to be here with you, talking about allyship that facilitates change. This all started out with one text message between Isaiah and myself. That was only a couple of months ago. And really, it was a conversation that inspired both of us to be daring enough to dream and no longer stay on the sidelines in a lot of these conversations. Isaiah and I feel that our superpower is connecting people and building community and having a heart posture for service. And this was the birth of Equity Matters. And we believed with the right tools and with leaders like you and connecting with leader communities like this, that we could establish meaningful connections with global dynamic leaders to help create change. And we are committed to developing those tools similar to this and creating resources and presenting and having these difficult conversations that need to happen, and together impacting the world. And now my co-founder and co-host, Isaiah Samuel.
Thank you so much. Next slide, please. Who is Equity Matters? When you think about the work that we're doing and the reason for doing it, we really have a conviction between the both of us to create spaces for dynamic leaders from all over the world to be able to come together and have conversations that really can catalyze the change that we want to see in the world. Equity Matters is a community. It's a place where you can share resources. It's a place where you can have dynamic conversations. And it's a place where we believe that we can incubate the next set of leaders that can be the change makers that we want to see in the world. We believe that any change that we want to see in the world can happen, albeit slow. It can happen one ripple effect at a time. And so a foundation of what we've created at Equity Matters is really around the belief that with community, with conversation, and with the right tools and resources, anything is possible. So we're super excited to be here with you today. We're super excited to share our story. And we're here today to really talk about allyship and how we can serve as allies to facilitate the change that we want to see in the world, in our professional lives, and in our business lives. So thank you so much for having us, and we look forward to a great conversation today. Next slide, please.
So we're going to start out, what the heck is allyship? And simply put, there are some difficult conversations that we as leaders often have to have. And in the environment in the world today, this is one of them, dealing with allyship and how to kind of create spaces for others, whether it be in our work environment or our personal lives. And just to simply keep things easy, Isaiah and I really liked what Marco Lindsay had to say, who is also part of Equity Matters. He said, showing up for me as I would, showing up for me as you would want me to show up for you. And how simple is that? It's like treating each other as equals. And that's a really easy way to identify what is allyship and how can we become allies for each other. Next slide.
Another community spotlight that we want to kind of draw attention to is here from Shonda Madison, who serves as the head of diversity and inclusion at Invite. Now, what this speaks to me is really having an uproar for injustice. When we talk about allyship and we talk about what allies can do, it's really about serving as a voice, as an amplifier for those that are marginalized, for those whose voices have been downtrodden and beaten, and really helping folks to feel that they are equal, really creating the space for folks to be able to join on the conversation, to be able to have a seat at the table. And ultimately, it starts with having a conviction and a care for other people. It really talks about being able to speak to the things that are wrong and advocating for others. And so what we like to do here is just really think back to the conversations that we had in our Equity Matters Roundtable and really set the tone. As Rashanda mentioned, it's really about treating others the way that you want to be treated. And you can also think about allyship as really being in a place to amplify the voices of others and raise uproar for the injustices that marginalized folks might be facing. Next slide.
And there's two different types of allyship. You can be having authentic allyship, or you can have performative allyship. And Isaiah and I are going to break those down so we can have some clear identity around how to best be an ally. And the first is sitting up, and we're going to highlight just a few of the things here. And the first is sitting with discomfort. These are not easy conversations. We mentioned that earlier before. But it's important for us to get the stories of those who are different from ourselves, getting the stories of people who don't look like you, and understanding what has been their journey, what has been their trial through life. And as you get that and creating that curiosity and having that open dialogue, you can learn some things, and hopefully it will inspire you to have a little bit more empathy. And also in this, it's not about you. Oftentimes we come into conversations wondering what can we get out of it, but this is an opportunity for you to actually not to put yourself aside, but putting yourself in that person's shoes. It's not about you. It's your chance to hear these stories and amplify them, and not only amplify them, but see how you can possibly make a difference in moving the needle on these issues of race, whether it be gender inequality or through ethnicity. And the last one is commit to anti-racist work, whether that is just starting in your family, sitting around a table and having a discussion, or that's actually getting out and protesting or becoming parts of communities that are having these conversations. What work are you personally owning and willing to do? What part of this are you actually willing to get involved in? And that might even be educating yourself. That is showing true authenticity in your allyship, in your journey.
So when we talk about authentic allyship, which is obviously what we want everyone to subscribe to, we need to be able to juxtapose that with performative allyship. Now, you might be wondering, what is performative allyship? Simply put, performative allyship is allyship theater. Essentially doing things for the recognition, doing things and misrepresenting the energy and the effort that needs to be put, and ultimately creating detrimental effects for the marginalized group that you're actually supposed to be supporting and uplifting. So we do have a lot of things on this slide here, but I want to focus on three things specifically that highlight performative allyship and why it's important that we need to stray away from that and look for ways in which we can be authentic allies to the groups and the people that we're looking to serve and support. The first thing is, everyone is doing it, so I have to. We're in an age of, I hate to say monkey see, monkey do, or, do what other people are doing. But everybody is doing it, so I have to. Allyship is really not about just getting in on the wave. As Rashanda mentioned, it's all about letting the uncomfort, the discomfort sit within yourself, and really understanding and thinking through how you can be a better advocate for the other person, how you can be an advocate for a community, how you can be an advocate for a marginalized group. You don't have to get in because everyone is doing it. It's really about having a sincere conviction to want to move the needle forward. And so it starts by not just jumping in because your friends are doing it, not just jumping in because your colleagues are doing it, but thinking through the way in which you can make the most impact. And that's one of the things that we are incredibly proud about with Equity Matters, because we provide another space where people can come and be themselves and learn about the different ways to be impactful. Not everybody's going to do it the same way, and you can't hold everybody to that same standard. So everybody can make a difference in their own way. And just because everybody is doing it, you don't have to do it in the same way. Think through how to really allow your conviction to come out and how you can best serve a community. The second thing that we want to highlight that is related to performative allyship is the optics. These days, most people do things because they want to be seen. They want to make a change and then post it on Instagram or on YouTube or whatever the case is. But performative allyship really highlights the optics. It's not really about what people are seeing you do. It's not about the allyship theater. It's really about being able to do things sincerely and not necessarily show it, but really doing things because, again, you have a heart posture for service and you're looking to support a people, a community, a group, and amplify the impact that they can have. And the last thing that I'll touch on is virtue signaling, or keeping the receipts, as the cool kids like to say. And that ultimately is really about really talking about what you've done already and hanging that over the head of the group that you're trying to support. Again, there's a selflessness around being an authentic ally, and that needs to permeate through every action. So, we encourage everybody to really think through these and really focus on being really authentic allies. And that's the way to go forward. Next slide, please.
What does a real ally look like? This is probably one of my favorite slides on here, because it really just breaks it down and taking on the struggle as your own. So we're going to just start and kind of go through this, the autonomy of a real ally. And it's just really actually having the heart and being empathetic towards other people, showing empathy. And the best way I believe that you can begin to show empathy is as you're getting those stories, as you're being curious on your journey, that you are going to hear some things that are going to make you uncomfortable, but it will help your empathy to grow. And also, the more research you do, it will also help your empathy to grow. And having an ear to listening to those experiences, without an awareness of the things that are happening that may be unjust, then change cannot happen. So we do need to listen to these stories. We do need to see the films like the death of George Floyd. This has catalyzed a lot of change in our country, and we need to continue to see and listen to these things in order for change to happen, especially in our corporate environments. And as leaders, really taking an initiative and actually what this change looks like. And the last thing I will say is the eyes to identify privilege. Privilege is always a tricky one to talk about because people often will say, I've worked hard, I've done my duty, I have earned where I am. And that is so true. However, I just like to break it down really simply for you to understand what is privilege on just a day-to-day basis that you may not even realize. When we once, before COVID, and we went into our work environments, think about the times that you walked into the office and the majority of the people actually looked just like you. And how many people, whether they were women or people of color, that there were less of in the room. Maybe there were only 2 of people of color in your work environment. Switch that around and think about how you would feel if you were in their shoes, if you were that only woman in leadership, or if you were those only 2 people of color walking into your work environment or a part of the community in your work environment? How are we as leaders creating space and room, whether that is through our DEI efforts or understanding where we are today and the numbers of what that looks like, and the possibility and setting numbers and matrix to extend and build greater communities of equity in our work environments. There was a McKinsey study that recently was launched just recently, talking about the competitive edge companies that leverage and make space, whether it be through gender or ethnicity diversity, are more competitive and are more profitable companies. So think about that. Think about the actual bottom line of what that would look like as leaderships making space for C-suites to have more space for women and more people of color. That's being an ally in leadership.
Excellent.
Isaiah?
Thanks, Rashanda.
Yeah.
Thank you. When we think through the anatomy of an authentic ally, we also have to have the nose to be able to sniff out the bias. Bias is inherent in each and every one of us. We are biased in our own unique ways. But a way to really start to make a change and minimize that bias is to recognize that it exists. So really educating ourselves on what the explicit and implicit biases that we may have, and really being intelligent and having some sort of discretion around that bias to really understand where it applies itself and where we can help to minimize it in order to see people for who they are and what they are bringing to the table uniquely. The second thing is having a mouth to speak up against injustice. Every voice matters. Your voice matters. Your leadership is around you being able to be vocal and speak up against the things that are wrong, the ills, being able to advocate for people that may not have the same voice that you have, that may not have the same impact or privilege that you might have. What are you going to do with your voice? And how are you spending that equity? Will you use that voice to be able to create and amplify spaces for other people, or will you remain silent? So if we're thinking through authentic allyship, it really is about being vocal and really recognizing that your unique experiences, your perspective, your voice matters in its own way. And in order to add to the communal brilliance, it's really about bringing your perspective and voice to the table and speaking up, having the same outroar and uproar for injustice that you would expect somebody to have for you, your family, or the ones that you care about. The last thing that we're going to talk through is, having hands that can take action and make change. We all have a unique gift of being able. We are all able. We are all able to make a difference. Whether it's the work that PAFOW is doing with moving and envisioning and describing and bringing people together to talk about what the future of work is going to look like. Whether you want to go out and protest, whether you're voting, whether you're creating spaces like we are at Equity Matters, we all are able to make some sort of change and take some sort of action in order to create more equitable spaces. And so the last bit about the hands is really thinking through how and what you can do in your own unique way, again, not what everybody's doing, to be able to minimize the discrepancies and the gap that exists and really serve as authentic allies to those that are in need. Next slide, please.
I love this question. What is the tie between leadership and allyship? And we touched on that a little bit in the last slide. But I don't know if we're able to engage the audience here and hear what some people might be thinking about that. What is the tie between leadership and allyship? Are we able to do that?
So just a question for the community, if you're able to and you would like, you can just enter some things in the chat, and we'll call them out as we see them. But the question again is, what is the tie? What do you believe is the tie between leadership and allyship? How do those two things intermingle?
Okay, we just launched that, and I'm going to actually jump in and ask the
I was going to
first.
ask you, Al, if you want to take a stab.
Yeah. Before I do, I am sitting back here and I have all kinds of emotions going through me because it's number one, I celebrate what you two are doing. I also realize that as a 52-year-old man, for us to have this happening in American society, let alone around the world, 50 years after what was termed the civil rights movement. And I don't know if we've necessarily taken a step back. So I am in this place where we have the conversations are long overdue. And so I celebrate that you all are facilitating this in the way that you do. So you're exhibiting the leadership that is necessary, and it's inspiring to me, and I know it's going to be inspiring to those who are listening. So to answer your question, and we have it open, and I'll look and see if anyone has some ideas on this. But I am frankly trying to define allyship and what it means for me. And you're helping with that. And the idea that leadership historically has been this model of having to know the right way forward, and kind of the person at the front of the room, and turning that around and really being the empathetic, curious, affirmative inquiry person. And in so doing, I believe that the appropriate action will emerge. Inherent in that is just creating the space, making this a priority. And so I guess that's where I would start, is actually carving out the time. We're all so busy. We're all got all these stuff going on. Oh, Black Lives Matters over there. That's somebody else's problems. There will be some legislation, some law coming down, some policy, and I'll have to deal with it, as opposed to taking ownership of the problem and going after it and proactively making change in your life. So that's what I would hope leadership is. And if that, is an effective ally, then, so be it. But that's where my head is. I hope that, makes sense. Any comments, questions on that?
That's really good. It's about leadership taking accountability on the allyship journey, not just for you as an individual, which is where you want to start, but also that trickles out into where do we spend most of our time at work, and how is work actually, workplace and work environments, creating and fostering a place where that can actually flourish. And having these types of conversations in work environments, I know, are often difficult, but they're needed. How will you ever know where you are as a company, and how will you ever know where you want to be, and also creating that competitive edge if you're not having these types of dialogues? They're so imperative, I think. And I think people are kind of tired of kind of pushing it or shoving it under the rug. They want to have these types of conversations and these types of engagements. But it's how are you doing it, and how are you fostering that?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I'm gonna. You go ahead, Isaiah.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, Al, two things that stood out to me that you mentioned is just having some sort of orientation and inkling to want to do something. And most of the time in the conversations that Rashanda and I have been having over the past few months, a lot of folks really speak to the fact that they want to have this perfect way of solving the issues. It's not that people aren't sensitive to what's going on, but it does not have to be perfect. And Al, one of the things that you just said, it starts with creating the space. It can be a very small step and an orientation to want to really just understand what the other side is going through, asking questions, creating a space where you can just have this dialogue like we're having, just so I can understand what your perspective is, and you can learn from me and I can learn from you. So, for everybody listening that thinks about, what that tie is, it's really about just orienting yourself to other people, understanding that we all have our biases. We all are different. We come from different places, but the steps that you take don't need to be perfect. We believe And this is something Rashanda and I have talked about. Every little drop matters because it ultimately adds to the ripple effect. So doing and playing your own small part is part of the solution. It's a marathon and not a sprint. And we all need to be energized. This is a time where we all need to be energized. We all need to keep our vibrations high, and we all need to believe and hope for the best. No matter what we continue to see, our impact, what we can do, and what the future is going to look like rests on the faith that we have and our ability to continually and incrementally push that change forward. And I honestly believe that that's what it's about.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. There's a comment or an answer to the question that came in, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will pick up on the last point. It says, it reads, if a leader is not an ally, then they are resisting the change that's required, particularly around diversity, equity, and inclusion. In other words, it's a non-negotiable. Comments on that? I mean, I would agree, for one, not to bias your response, but comments on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. And we can even put up the next slide here and just start to unpack that, the slide after the question. We can put that up as well. So I completely agree, right? The way that we tie it all together and the way that we think about it, and this came up in one of the sessions that we have, is that it's really about being courageous, right? We have so many different parts of our lives that we want to blend together. It's really having the courage to be able to step up, to be able to create those spaces in our professional lives, in our personal lives, and really be able to really create the space for these conversations to happen. While you're on this journey, some folks might not be there with you, but as a leader, and to the point that was made, as a leader, you should be willing and able to model the behavior that you want other people to be able to imbibe it. And so I absolutely agree that a leader should be looking to do this. But again, everybody has a different starting point. Everybody has a different goal that they want to reach. And so it just starts with being courageous and taking the chance to create those spaces and move the needle forward.
Yeah. The other part to that is the term leader does not have to mean the guy at the top, the woman at the top, the person at the top. You are a leader. You taking ownership in this conversation, you taking ownership in this journey, you showing up to work and maybe challenging or asking the question, why aren't these things in place? Why aren't we talking about these things? That actually moves and creates a ripple effect all on its own. The leadership doesn't always have to start from the top. You being a leader and taking self-accountable, like being self-accountable for this and stepping out in that, can create a ripple effect and can also change leadership at the top. They might have a blind, it's hard to even admit that, but there might be a blind spot there. And being able to speak to that and say, hey, why aren't we talking about these issues that are actually important? They're in the news. People are wondering about it. What are we doing? Where do we want to be as a company? Do we want to consider, continue being competitive as a company? I almost feel like companies soon will be old fashioned or kind of out of date if they're not talking about these issues. These are important. And as people are wanting to attract and retain top talent, you are going to have to talk about your values as a company, and you are going to have to talk about leveling the playing field and actually talking about what your company inside initiatives are. Because if people don't feel comfortable, they're not going to stay, no matter how brilliant they are. Yeah.
Agreed. And if we can move to the next slide. No, just to the point that we mentioned initially, it really is all about being courageous. Not everybody has the same path or will receive the same support when you really start thinking about this. But like we've spoken about, it really is all about connecting with a community that allows you to blossom and grow in the ways that you want. Being able to exchange ideas, being able to connect with people that have that same vibration frequency on that same path is really important. And if you're a curious mind and you have that conviction, there's a community that's willing to receive you. And that's one of the things that we've learned, is that people are yearning for the spaces to be able to have these conversations and move the needle forward. And so It's really imperative to display courage. And then the other thing that I mentioned before is really modeling the behavior. What is a leader? How do you serve as an inclusive leader and as an authentic ally is really all about the way that you also model this to be able to influence the people at the levels that you're at. And as Rashanda mentioned, everybody is a leader based on their perspective. It's not necessarily about title. It's really about the impact that you can have. And so we view it as that. Next slide, please.
I love what Karthik says here. One of the things that has come up again and again and again, as Isaiah and I have had these allyship conversations, even on a podcast we were recently featured on, somebody asked a really interesting question that I had never even thought about. And she goes, well, I want to know what is it that I need to do as an ally? So I can check that box and say, I did it. It's complete. It's done. This is not about checking the box. This is about doing the work. Being an ally, you need the action behind it. And it's not an action that you check the box and then it's done. This is continuous. This is almost a lifestyle. You can continue to have empathy towards people. You continually look for ways that you can contribute to a more equitable work environment. Even look for it in your personal lives. And then this ends up creating ripple effects throughout the world. And we keep talking about ripple effects, but we really find, Isaiah and I started this with just a text message to share tools, which then led from, having a conversation with 5 people to 20 people. And this has grown since then. It can start out small, as Isaiah mentioned earlier. It is not about perfection. This is about progression. And we all can get behind that. It's the small steps that are going to create those ripples. And it's a continuation. So next slide.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rashanda. That was well said. So the first session that we had at Equity Matters was really about unpacking this topic. Given the pressurized environment that we find ourselves in, it's really, really key for all of us in leadership positions to really look and serve as allies for folks that are marginalized, for folks that do not have the same opportunity, and to leverage our unique privilege. Everybody has some sort of privilege. And so to really recognize what that privilege is and use it to amplify others. This presentation here is really what Rashanda was referring to. When the incident of George Floyd happened, we both came together and we were looking for ways to inspire people to go out and be the catalyst in changes and to catalyze the change that they want to see in the world. And so this presentation here is from Janae Butler, and it really speaks to the do's and don'ts of allyship. So we'll go through it together, highlighting a few points here. And essentially, this is really what inspired us to go out and create the space that we have. So the first thing here about the do's of allyship, be open to listening. We mentioned it earlier during the anatomy piece. And so, leveraging our understanding and really being open to listening to where people are coming from and what they're going through. The second is be aware of your implicit biases. We all have them. So pay attention to that so that you can understand what the bias is that you have, and you can actively minimize that bias. The third thing is to do more research about the history of the struggle in which you're participating. We talked about performative allyship. It really makes sense to educate yourself and know what you're really standing up for and why it's important. The fourth, do the inner work. Figure out a way to acknowledge how you can participate, how you participate in oppressive systems. Some folks may be contributing to the issue, and it may be as simple as just stepping aside. A leader can step forward and step back. So it may be as simple as stepping back and giving somebody else an opportunity. So understand how systems may be feeding and contributing to oppression of marginalized groups, and really understand how you can play a role in helping alleviate that. Do the work and figure out how to change oppressive systems. Participate. It really is about participation, and everybody can do the work in their own unique way. So think about and come in with a community and figure out a way that you can help support allyship, and you can be a better ally. Amplify online and the voices of those without privilege. So how can you use your voice to amplify others and ensure that they get the attention and they get the opportunities that they don't have? And lastly, learn to accept criticism, even if it's not comfortable. And Rashanda spoke to this a little bit earlier. It really starts with the conviction. It really starts with sitting with the uncomfortable and really getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. That is one of the best ways in which you can really imbibe yourself in the things that are needed and really start to take in what you're getting from the folks that you're communicating with. So those are a couple of things that you can do if you want to be a better ally. Rashanda is going to talk through the don'ts of allyship.
Yeah, the don'ts. So I'll start with number one. I'll read through some of these, but I'm going to go super light on them because a lot of these we actually spoke about earlier. And I want to get back into actually having a dialogue with Al. I always find the live conversation is really dynamic and gets people thinking. Don't expect to be taught or shown. Take it upon yourself to use the tools around you and to learn and answer your own questions. So I agree and disagree with this one. And the reason why is because part of my motivation in even connecting with Isaiah when we first even thought of presenting this as a tool was I know a lot of people talk about not, hey, it's their problem. They need to learn. They need to figure it out. We wanted to create a space where we could do that together. And there are people like myself and Isaiah who are creating space where you can learn about things that you may not have known and it's a safe space where you can be open and transparent. We like to call that just creating a space where we can all be open and having these conversations. And we've had that in our roundtables. And that's one thing people really do appreciate. But I do agree with the fact that it is important to take on this and do some research on your own, do the Googling on your own, ask friends and colleagues who you feel would be safe and be vulnerable first and say, look, I may not know what it's like to be a woman in a male dominated industry. I may not know what it's like to be a person of color, but I would love some time to sit down with you and kind of learn your story. I have a few questions. I'm not sure if they're okay for me to ask you, but can we gingerly walk through this together? That's impactful. That's real. And people are actually doing this. So I commend you for those who are continue to doing that kind of work. So that was my agree, disagree there. But you do need to take your ownership. Do not participate for a gold medal in the oppression Olympics. You don't need to compare your struggle is better than mine, worse than mine. It's not about that. It's about really listening. And we talked about that earlier and really putting yourself aside for a minute and really just hearing what that other person's story is. And this is not a compare or contrast kind of thing. This is just really showing up and being present. We need more of that in our lives. And I believe COVID has kind of created a space for us to be more present. This is a time to really listen and take in a lot of that information. Don't behave as though you know best is number 3 here on the list. We don't even know all the answers. And there are some ways in which to help facilitate what allyship looks like and to move the needle, but we're all learning on this journey together. And number 4, don't take credit for the labor of those who are marginalized and did the work before you stepped into the picture. This one is interesting. I believe this kind of works in more work environments, teams that you're collaborating on. Be sensitive to what part you actually played and what part you didn't. Give credit where it's due. And then number 5, don't assume that every member of an underinvested group feels oppressed. Not everybody's journey. Isaiah has touched on this quite a bit. Not everybody's journey is the same. They're all very unique. You can meet someone, person of color, a woman who's maybe never even felt any of these things. Ask people. That's, again, why curiosity is so valuable. It will teach you so much to learn from people, firsthand stories, firsthand encounters. Don't make assumptions. Next slide. This is Donnie from our roundtable. He speaks specifically on the last thing that Isaiah and I mentioned, which allyship is a continuation. It is a journey. One of the things I loved about when he showed up and was able to talk about this is he was so transparent. He said, I hadn't even thought about allyship. I hadn't even thought about what it would mean to me until I took a step back when people were posting Black Lives Matter on Instagram and putting the black screen on. It really gave him a chance. He did the work himself. And one of the things is he became more conscious and more deliberate in his allyship. And I love that word, deliberate. And he knows it's a continuation. And I know that he's had even difficult conversations recently, but that has helped him to grow as a person and actually grow in his empathy and understanding. That is allyship. It's not perfect. It's that progression, and that's that daring to be bold, brave enough to get in there and really kind of put yourself in other people's shoes. Isaiah?
And to add to that is, you're not alone, and nobody has it perfect. And I think that's one of the things that we can take away, even from what Rashanda said in the last slide, is, we're constantly learning. We're not experts, and we don't claim to be. But you'll be surprised how many experts out there and how many people are willing to connect in order to help move the needle forward. And I think in this time, in this day and age, that is really what we need. We need to create spaces for people to come together. Donnie mentioned it's really all about being deliberate. It's a continuous effort, and we continue to evolve and explore different ways in which we can educate our community, educate each other, and ensure that we're empowered to be the best that we can be. If you're thinking about this from a business imperative, it makes sense because more diverse companies are more successful. So how can we create spaces for people to be their best selves, to be included, to have a diverse workforce, and to really ensure that equity is available for everybody that's participating in those spaces. So it really is about that, and we're super excited to be able to be part of this work. And we today, I just want to encourage everybody, no matter where you think you are, there's no perfect starting point, but you are not alone. Everybody is in their unique place, but you have a chance to make an impact and shape the world the way that you want to see it. And so we'll stop there. And I know we have a couple of questions to discuss with Al if we actually have the time. If not, we can keep it going.
No, we do have the time, and there's a couple of things that I want to address with you before we sign off, because and I want to go to this notion of white privilege because I know people who they show up as white, and they don't want to talk about it. They feel shame where they never thought there would be shame. Why should I feel guilty about being, privileged? At the same time, acknowledging that there has been an easier path to where you are is helpful. And so my contention or idea that I want to just put out there is I'm trying to have the shame, potential shame, associated with white privilege pulled off, and just be curious not only about your experience, but be curious about the experience of those who have not had that same pathway, and being, at the end of the day, being kind to yourself and being kind to those others who just did not have that same experience. So any comments or advice on how we can approach it more openly than shamefully? Do you follow me?
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Isaiah and I are super passionate about this, and we're intentional when it came to building Equity Matters. We didn't want just people of color, because we have these conversations around our dinner table. We have had these conversations for years. It was important for us to have all kinds of people be a part of Equity Matters for that specific reason. And one of the things I mentioned to Isaiah was like, I had a phone call with a friend who called me when all of these things started first happening. And he said to me, Rashanda, how can I have this conversation with you? And I know it's really difficult. And I said to him, just open up from your heart and share what it is that you want to ask me. And we unpacked a real conversation. But we unpacked a real conversation. And the thing he said to me was, I was afraid to have this conversation with you, but I'm glad I did. We have to let go of the fear because it's the barrier to entry. Once we let go of the fear and the shame that we think each other may have in having this conversation and let it go, we can actually really have heart-to-heart conversations. And have you ever walked away from a heart-to-heart conversation going, I'm still going to be hardened, or I'm still going to, wear this shame or this fear? It's like all that subsides and we just become human beings to each other. And I see you and you see me. And honestly, that's where we need to get to. But there's so much hindrance on both parties' sides a lot of times in these discussions that they're afraid of what will be revealed. But a lot of times what's really revealed is it's the same basic human needs. It's the same basic human stuff. So that's sort of my part on it. Be bold and actually just have those conversations. And that is what has happened a lot of times in the Equity Matters chat is people get comfortable getting honest, being transparent, and being humble. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah,
Isaiah?
those are great points. So I have three things on this. The first is inclusivity and vulnerability. The second is the idea of privilege. And then lastly is the power of your voice, right? If I was going to break it down. So, Rashanda mentioned be inclusive. She's not off at all. Really, when we thought about who could we bring to the table to have the most impact and really drive these conversations, we didn't think about people that look just like us. We thought about the fact that everyone's unique experience adds to the communal brilliance. And so the first thing that I would say is if you're looking to be able to make an impact or start your allyship journey, or even address, privilege or white privilege, whatever it might be, think about being inclusive. Don't just have the conversation with people you've always been talking to. Try and reach out to somebody that's different. And that includes a level of vulnerability as well. Go out of your comfort zone and say, hey, this is what I don't know. This is what I want to know. Can we break bread? Can we spend some time? And can we just talk? Again, it goes back to the human need. How many people would say no, right? If you're being honest and open. That's the first step. The second thing is privilege. We talk about white privilege, but there's several different layers of privilege. I myself have certain privileges some other people might not have, whether they're black, white, or in between. So I have to recognize that, like, the way that my life has played out, it affords me certain spaces and places that I might go. Am I aspiring to be more and do more? Of course. But there's a certain level of access that I have. And so as a leader and as a person that believes in giving back, how do you lift as you climb? And that's a very important fact. And that really is what allyship is about. So take the white out of it and really think of the fact that you might be in a position, in a situation where you can give back and contribute to the development and growth of other people. So have that conviction and have that heart posture for service to be able to do that. And then the last thing I'll talk about is the power of a voice. When all this stuff started happening with George Floyd and the ills that are going on and the pressurized environment that we see, I had a deep conviction to write a letter to my MBA class at Berkeley Haas. And so I wrote a note to the entire executive MBA community to say that we should never forget what we are seeing happen today. We are leaders today. We're going to have opportunities in the future that our privilege of being at Berkeley provides us. So we should always understand that whenever we are at that table, there's an obligation and a responsibility. It's called the noblesse oblige, the noble obligation to be able to give back. And so we should be able to do that. And so it's the power of a voice, me feeling that conviction inside myself to understand that I have a community of privileged folks that I can make some sort of ripple effect and impact on, and then inspire them to go out and make whatever change that they need to. But I will never stay quiet. And I think those three things are what sums up being a really responsible and authentic ally.
I love what you both are saying, and you're inspiring me. And so, thank you for that. I'll say one more thing, then I'll let you say some closing comments. Is that I heard on the radio a few months back, and it was kind of adjacent to what we're talking about, but it was talking about tourism going down. And tourism, the gentleman said, walks arm in arm with peace. And I don't know if it was my mood that day, but I was like, what would it be like if we approached the curiosity of the Black experience in America as tourists? That we're going to go and be curious and sit at the table and not come in with shame or judgment, but come in like we're experiencing a new culture with compassion, with interest. And I do not know if that's an appropriate approach or not, but I just found that if we can just unwind some of the shame and really come in with compassionate curiosity and hope for the future that we're going to get to a better place, I think we'll all benefit. So that's my 2 cents on it. But again, you two are awesome. Any closing comments? Rashanda, you want to go first?
Well, Al, thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of PAFOW 2020. I believe during Data and Diversity, you mentioned about 2020 being kind of like a catalyst for growth, or even a year for growth for folks. I strongly agree with that 100%. I even thought about writing a thank you note to the year 2020. Here's Isaiah and I's contact information. And we just thank you again for the privilege or even the opportunity to speak to the PAFOW global community today. It's been amazing.
I second what Rashanda said. Al, thank you so much for being an incredible partner, for coming into the Equity Matters community and bringing such a wealth of knowledge. Everybody's been reaching out to us and saying how brilliant you were. We're super excited to be partnered with PAFOW, to be able to share on this important topic and really, hopefully, inspire folks to really go out and create their own change in the world. If you leave with nothing today, just understand that you matter, that your experiences matter, that this matters, and that we can all be the change that we want to see in the world. And we firmly believe that. So we urge you guys to reach out to us. If you want to get in touch, reach out to us on LinkedIn, Equity Matters. We have really great programming coming up. The next big session is going to be in November, and we hope to see you there. You can connect with us individually at Isaiah Samuel on LinkedIn or Rashanda Udekwu, and you can send us an email to equitymatters@rippleforgood.co. But we want to hear from you. We want to hear your feedback. We want to partner with you. And ultimately, we want to help move that needle forward. So thank you so much for your time. Al, thank you so much for having us. And it's our pleasure to be able to share and participate in this good work. We really, really appreciate the time.
Well, thank you again. You two be well, and hope to see you in person before too long. So thanks.